don't, it is very difficult to follow Arminio Fraga. I have known Arminio for many years, and it's a great privilege, and it's an incredible luxury that what Brazil has. I think very few countries can account for someone like Arminio to handle and manage their economy, so you have to feel very lucky about that. Let me say a little bit about things about myself. I am from Venezuela, you know, that North country, the only South American country that really plays very badly at soccer. My family is from Argentina, the other country that plays very badly soccer. And my mother is from Spain, where we usually hire all the Brazilians to play. So let me tell you a little bit about big data and what I think is particularly important for Brazil, and why I think that actually you can make a big difference. The world is actually having a tremendous revolution, and when I think about Latin America, is that from the revolutions that took place in the world in terms of technology and thought, Latin America was at the forefront several times. Unfortunately, those several times were about 200 years ago. When the countries were thinking about independence and democracy, yeah, Latin America was at the forefront of that. When the world was thinking about social policy, yeah, Latin America was at the forefront of that. In fact, the first time any constitution on earth wrote the word social security was the Venezuelan Constitution of 1819. So actually, there used to be a time when Latin America was at the forefront of thinking, of technology, and actually on progressive development. We actually missed the train. That statement will not apply to Latin America today. And the Industrial Revolution missed us. The globalization missed us. The education revolution missed us. So we actually have missed several of them. Right now, the world is in a new industrial revolution. It has kind of two parts. One part is based entirely on technology, and the other part is entirely based on data analytics. And it is hard to think how to do how to be part of the technological revolution. I think that's something that we have been fighting as countries for a long time. In fact, we love everything that ends with the word tech. So we love biotech, we love tech, we love anything that ends with tech. So crappy tech, corruption tech, so anything that actually ends with tech, we just fall in love with that. But we have proven that we have not been able to grasp that aspect. Having said that, I actually think that the data revolution is one that needs creativity, and that, my friends, we have in excess in Latin America. And we have proven that over and over again, and not only on art, but also on marketing, campaigns, and so on. So we are a very creative nation. And unfortunately, we devote that creativity to really bad things, like how to avoid taxes, and how to take shortcuts. And in some sense, that's not the best use of our creativity. Second aspect that is very important in our region is that for many, many years, we invested on formal education and then offer really lousy jobs. So our engineering universities in South America are extraordinarily good, especially in Brazil. They are very, very good universities. Most of you actually went to those places to study. And if you study engineering in Brazil or in Rio, actually you have a world-class education. Now, when you get out of there, the jobs that you are confronted and the jobs that you are offered are really lousy, are kind of Rio de Janeiro type of jobs. And so you get disappointed. A lot of the knowledge that you have acquired is very difficult to use. The combination of these two means that we have the human capital to be able to tackle the big data revolution. We do have. And so I hope that we don't miss the train. And Now, you cannot wait for governments to do it for you. This is not about governments actually helping you do it. This is about you taking control of your own future. That you understand what is the responsibility that you have to build a better country, a better society. You have to start forming a vision of what is the country you want to build and stop discussing the things that you want to destroy. This is not very useful. And furthermore, it's not a very good use of our human capital nor our creativity. We have basket cases like Venezuela, where the only thing we talk about is how to destroy what we have been building. It's a very destructive agenda. It's a little bit what Trump is doing right now. It's not very useful. But the only way that this is going to change is you cannot wait for the political system to change. I agree with Arminio that you need a political reform. I will be willing to bet that that political reform is not going to take place in our lifetime. And that means that you cannot wait. Actually, I don't think that Brazil can wait for that. I don't think that you can wait for them to solve it. I think you have to understand that you have been waiting for you. You have been waiting exactly for people exactly like you. And therefore, you need to take control of that. So my advice to you is just do it, like what Nike says. Anyway. Let me tell you a little bit about what are the possibilities. And in fact, one of the amazing things about the research that we have done is that this actually happens in Latin America. It was an Argentinian, Alberto Cavallo, that started. He was an MBA at Sloan. Then he decided to go to this second-class university called Harvard. And he did a PhD there. But he's actually my partner in crime. Very important for my English is that I don't know how to use the pronouns very well. So when I say I mean we. I mean Alberto and myself. And when I say we, I mean Alberto, okay? So in other words, how do I use this? I am going to change the world means Alberto and I are going to change the world. And we screw up, that means that Alberto made a mistake, just to clarify. So, but this is something that we started on a laptop here at MIT. But now I would say that 100% of what we do actually occurs in Montevideo, Uruguay. 100%. I mean, except a tiny bit about security and encryption that we do here, everything else happens in Uruguay. So this is a Latin American product of export, okay? The ones that we want to have. So let me show you a little bit of my views. First, in terms of, this just highlights that I have very big problems with my eyesight. This is the font that I need to be able to read in class, okay? So one thing is that I want to highlight is the fact that technology is allowing us to collect more data than ever before in humankind, and that seems to be good. But there's a very important distance between data and information. So one of the challenges that we have on big data is that yes, we produce more data, but we don't make better decisions. Actually, I will actually be willing to bet that today we're more misinformed than in the past. But that doesn't mean that we should do. Let me give you an example. Word processor allows us to write more words, paragraphs, and sentences than ever in the history of humankind. We write more sentences today than any time, and in every language. I can write in Portuguese without a problem. I don't know Portuguese at all. I don't care. Google Translator takes care of that. And my Portuguese will be a horrible Portuguese, but you will be able to read it. So somehow, we can write words cheaper and faster than ever before. But that we don't produce better literature. And that's a big distance. The fact that we produce more words doesn't mean we organize them better. And this is exactly the same thing that has happening with big data. So let me give you some advices about how to use that and what are the things that we can produce. So first, the world is lacking of information, not necessarily of data. And that's one message that I want to convey. Second aspect is how do we think about data in general? And the way I divide the data is I divide the data in two parts. One data that is the data that we collect based on surveys. That's the data that we field. By the way, I am absolutely certain that they are going to ask you to to fill a form about this conference. I mean, the organizer of this conference, is that true, Rafael? Yeah, you are going to have. So you're going to have some survey saying, like, tell me how was the food, how were the speakers, were they lousy or not, give me your comments, your evaluation. And the reason why they do that is that they want to know what is your opinion about the experience that you have. How was the food, the coffee breaks, etc. When you receive those forms, I want to ask you, are you happy? Do you feel like, wow, finally, I can fill one of those surveys. I have been waiting for such a long time. I would love to fill that survey. It's the first time I'm going to have an exam, and I don't care about the grade. I mean, when do you feel happy? See, surveys are extraordinarily intrusive. And so when you have to file taxes, it's intrusive. When you have to answer a question, it's intrusive. It actually bothers your life. But most of the data that we actually collect in the world is based on a form of surveys. The advantage of surveys is that they are being designed to answer a question. We want to know how this experience was for you. So the survey has a set of questions to try to answer that particular question. So it has been designed to answer that question. The problem is that it's very intrusive, so you are unwilling to do it. The data that we collect with sensors, in fact, most of you have something like that. Raise your hand if you have a smartphone. I just want to see how many of you have a smartphone. Good. See, you call these smartphones, you know? How do you call these in Brazil? Mobile phones? Smartphones. In some places they call it mobile phones. In other places they call it iPhone. It's interesting because they call it phone. It has a last name, phone. Isn't that interesting? You know, this is not a phone. There's no chance it's a phone. This actually doesn't have the most important attribute of a phone, which is a stress release mechanism. Imagine the following. You remember those phones that we had on the kitchens that you put on the walls of the kitchen? This is what usually happens. If the dean of MIT called me to one of the phones and says, Roberto, you know, you have been fired. I say, what? You can't fire me. I quit, you miserable bastard. And then you just hit the phone into the wall. Is that okay? The same conversation with a smartphone. Roberto, we have decided to let you go. What? You can't fire me. I quit. See, there's no stress release mechanism on that activity. This is not a phone. This is a computer with sensors. And actually, this computer actually measures your life. And in fact, as you move along with these devices, we pick small pieces of your life. Your GPS, where you were. Which stores did you go? What are the individuals that you call? What is your network? And therefore, we learn aspects of your life through these phones, through the devices. If you have one of these devices, actually I have your heart rate. And we will have your heart rate every 5 seconds. We know how you sleep. We know how many, where you walk, where you were, in which store did you spend time, were you in front of the window or were you inside of the store? So we know a lot of pieces of your life. And therefore, you are actually doing a survey without you knowing. You have no clue, but you actually are filling a survey. And therefore, the question is that this survey is very voluntary, is very honest, is very transparent, and therefore I can learn a lot about you. That has two parts. Has the part of privacy, that you have to be careful of not abusing the information that you have, and hopefully you all work on understanding what are the type of regulations that you need to have to use this data. But the second, and very importantly, is that we can truly improve the way we measure life. Part of my research is to try to think about how we can measure life better, from very personal aspects like sadness all the way to GDP and inflation rate. So I want to show you a little bit of that. But the technology is allowing us to do surveys to people without having to ask them. And that makes a big difference. You are very likely to be truthful and honest. And not only that, instead of interviewing 1,000 people, I'm interviewing millions. So that changes dramatically the way we can measure life. And that's more or less my research. So this is part of, by the way, I call that organic data. And I call it organic because the way the data is generated is something that you don't know is being generated. The society is measuring itself without knowing why we're measuring society. And this is happening in every country. And by the way, in Latin America, because regulation is laxer, means that we are measuring things much better. For example, the only place on earth where I have a daily measure of GDP, you know what country is that one? Well, it's actually not a country, it's a state. It's the state of Sao Paulo. So I have a daily measure of GDP from Sao Paulo, not from New York, from Sao Paulo. And the first country where we measure inflation rate in the world was Chile. The second one was Brazil. Daily measure. It's the second longest we have had. There were Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and Uruguay, that order. And we have been measuring inflation rate at the daily levels for many years, more than 10 years actually, right now. In October will be 10 years. When the iPhone started, we started downloading inflation rates in Brazil. So there are tremendous possibilities, and what I want to do is to show you some of them, okay? And it's Brazil indeed presents a tremendous possibility in that aspect. Regulation is laxer, so if you use properly this data, you will be able to answer questions that no one even knew the question existed. And therefore you can have an aspect, a view of the world, improve your products, improve your efficiency in a way that was never done. And actually I think that Latin America can become the place where we do consulting of data analytics to the world. And that requires individuals that understand the data analytics, that understand how to manage those companies, and that can put engineers, economists, psychologists, and statisticians all together in one room. Hopefully they hate each other in such a way that one is the check and balances of the other. Just get them together and see how things will change. Okay, so let me just tell you more or less about inflation rate. This is 100% Brazil, okay? Oh, I think I'm gonna show you the US just for completeness, so the US citizens don't feel excluded from this, but I'm gonna show you everything that we have done on Brazil and what are the things that we are measuring on Brazil. So first, and in fact, I'm gonna show you a little bit about the differences between the official data and the data that we collect, and talk a little bit about the current situation. And so first are the inflation rates. We download prices from all these countries in the world. We download every single day. It's called the Billion Prices Project because in practice, every week, we actually track 1 billion products worldwide. Just to give you an idea, your statistical office tracks about 40,000 a month, okay? So these are orders of magnitude bigger in terms of what we do. And as I said, we started down here in all these countries here. Let me show you some of the inflation rates. What we do is, this technology is called web scraping. What we do is we download prices from online stores, then we pick which items we're gonna put on the indexes and we produce these indexes, okay? It's a very simple procedure. We're kind of replicating the procedures that a statistical office they do, but then we try to improve on those sectors that we measure much better. For example, electronics, clothing, and so on. This is the inflation rate of the United States. And that number there, I had it this morning. At 9 a.m. Eastern time, I have the inflation rate of every single country on earth that we download. Those are 80 countries on earth at 9 a.m. So not only we collect every day, but we actually compute very fast. By the way, the US is always the last country. So Australia, we get it very early. New Zealand, we get it very early. US is the last one that we collect. So about 6 a.m. every day in the morning, I have the inflation rate of Brazil of that day. We download at 2 a.m. on the country of origin. So first thing I want to show you is the red line is what we produce every day. The blue line is what the statistical office produce. And they are not identical, and I would never expect it to be identical. Part of my goal is to change the statistical offices and try in the statistical offices to improve their procedures. So there are times when we find more inflation than the official data and so on. Interestingly, actually, the United States use, and the office of the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the one that produces the blue line, they use our red line when they are actually being attacked by the public. When the people say that the government of the United States is manipulating the inflation rate, they tend to show the red line that we produce, and they said, well, if they are manipulating, at least we're manipulating equally or very badly than this guys at MIT. The interesting thing about that line is how the fact that you change the way you compute the inflation rate is how it moves. I want to show you some things. Like, for example, the peaks happen at different points in time. This is the inflation rate of the when you actually do a zoom month by month. And what happened is that because we measure every day, we detect inflation rate about 3 to 4 months before it's announced. So when the inflation rate comes, we see it early. When the deflation comes, we see it early. And it's consistently the case every single country. Brazil, we detect inflation 6 months before it happens. So when I give the data to the Central Bank of Brazil, actually I see inflation rate today of what the statistical office is going to report in September. Okay? So now you are wondering, do you see how close the US is to the online inflation rate? Because that's a very honest statistical office. Do you want to see Brazil? Well, I think we have run out of time, so no. So this is Brazil. They are not identical, but they are very, very close. And again, you can see this starts even before the United States. It starts in the middle of 2007. And now, this is, of course, is hard to see because, you know, the inflation rate in Brazil has been higher. But let me just show you this a shorter period so you can see what happens. This is the monthly inflation rate that in the last, you know, since 2014. So it's about 2 years of data. This is a smoothed version. And you can see how we peak before. We start to go down way before. We peak before. And by the way, we're coming down, which is kind of bad news, okay? So the assessment that Arminio said about the recession is correct. The inflation rate that Brazil used to have was far more vibrant. We have seen a tremendous slowdown and shows kind of what the impact of the recession is. Let me just show you more about Brazil. So this is the daily inflation rate. Second thing that we do in Brazil is to talk about the exchange rate. Okay. So the second thing that we do is we compare Brazil. I'm going to do this simple. We compare Brazil to United States, and we track item by item. And the idea is to look at the same TV, the same shirt, the same shoes from Nike, the same phones from Samsung, and we compare the prices between these two places, and that tells me how expensive Brazil is for the products that we import and export. I am not interested in comparing the price of an apartment because it's very difficult to bring 1 2-bedroom apartment from Rio to New York. So there's no arbitrage in that. I don't want to compare education because a first-grade education in the public sector in Rio is very different than a first-grade education in New York. I want to compare items that are identical. So what we do is we take things that go inside an engine of a vehicle. We put things that are clothing and food and so on. So we compare thousands of items. This is like the Big Mac index from the economists, but it's a Big Mac index with steroids. Instead of comparing one item, we have about 30,000 of them. And we construct an index. I needed to put a summation at MIT. Let me just show you more or less what happens to the exchange rate. Again, this is a country that we have the longest amount of data, and what we're doing is comparing what happens to the nominal rate and what happens to the prices at the store. And we look at these discrepancies. This discrepancy means that the exchange rate has appreciated too much. And therefore, actually, in Brazil, you need to get a depreciation right now. In other words, this is too expensive. This is how expensive is Brazil relative to their history. So Brazil usually is about 2 times more expensive than the United States. In other words, electronics, this is true in dollars. Electronic, by the way, you know it. You guys come here to Miami with the bags that are empty. You buy like crazy in Costco and go back to Rio, okay? So, I mean, you know you are more expensive. But the point is, this is actually detecting how expensive it is. And by the way, you don't buy first-grade education. You buy clothing and electronics and food and Toblerone, like crazy. You buy Toblerone here, okay? So, yeah, actually, Toblerone is like 6 times cheaper here than in Brazil, just to give you an idea. So there are some items that are very expensive. And gasoline is very expensive in Brazil. So a lot of these, but usually Brazil used to be about 2 to 3 times more expensive. And that became in the expansion, in the excessive expansion that you have due to the demand, that produced inflation that had no counterpart on the depreciation. Today you are too expensive. And this needs to be corrected. So this is, again, is in kind of, I was listening to Arminio, and I said, when Arminio was saying something about the data, I said, yeah, actually, our data agree with his view. so this expansion has had a cost, and the cost has not been fully internalized by the economy. It will come again. Let me finish with the core inflation rate. A very important question in an emerging market is how much of the inflation is due to the exchange rate, how much is due to the devaluation, how much of the inflation rate is due to oil prices, and how much of the inflation rate is due to Brazilians consuming too much. So we call this core inflation, and what we have a new procedure to do this. It's very difficult for the statistical office to do that. Actually, I think in Brazil it will be impossible to answer this question with official data. And what we do with that is we separate how much of the inflation rate. I'm going to give you this. Or you cannot see the dates. This is all the data from 2007 to today. This is how much. I'll put the slides in a web page if you want to see actually but this difference here, this accumulative inflation, that's the part that is explained by exchange rates, and that is the part that is explained by things like oil prices. Let me see if I have another graph. This is a closer graph. This is what happened the last year. Just to give you a number, I know this is about 4% inflation rate total, this movement, and a lot of that has been due to the demand. The demand is very weak, is weaker than what is shown in the data. So, in fact, I'm going to finish with this. I have 5 minutes, so I will actually just make sure that I finish on time. I think that it's very important to understand that new technologies will allow us for a lot of possibilities. My research is about measuring macroeconomic indicators, but that's not the end. I mean, there's no reason why that should be the end of the explanation. You're going to measure your consumers better, your suppliers better, your impact on the environment better. Actually, happiness you will measure better. You can measure demand, the product designs much better. So the data allows for tremendous possibilities. Credit worthiness. In Brazil, the interest rates are too high. A lot of that is because we don't know who should receive a loan. A lot of that is that we have no idea who's going to pay. So if you don't know who's going to pay, you're going to assume the worst on people. We can improve that. We can improve by actually understanding how they do. And you know what? People pay their bills, and they pay their bills every single month. They have a cell phone, and they pay their cell phone. That is a credit transaction. So if you don't understand how people pay their phones, you might understand who actually is creditworthy. They pay the electricity, they pay the water, they pay the utilities. Pay attention to how people actually pay small liabilities, and you might learn a lot about their ability to pay and their willingness to pay. We don't have to charge everybody with 30% interest rate. That is not the correct way. If you want to do microlending, do it smarter. And they collect the data to be able to do it smarter. And there's a lot of aspects that we do in our life that reflects our willingness to pay, our willingness to respect the contracts. We're assuming the worst. In Latin America, we always assume the worst on ourselves. We assume that everybody's corrupt. Raise your hand if you're a corrupt politician, please. Oh, everybody else not in the room is. That's the whole point. We have to stop. Who here has defaulted on your debt? Please raise your hand. Rafa. So, you don't default on your debt. So my point is, Brazilians are much better than what you think. But we're acting assuming the worst. And we do that when we set prices, when we give credit, when we do every single operation. It's time that actually you discover who you really are. And this will actually allow you to do that by looking at yourself better and closer. So let me just end by saying, what I'm working on GDP, this is by far my most ambitious project that I have ever done. I am trying to measure unemployment rate better. I'm trying to measure the most ambitious one is I want to produce a daily GDP measure. and the place where I started is Brazil, you must be doing something right. Because as a son of an Argentinian, that will be my last country to start. Thank you, sir, very much.